Excellent. Very good. Gordon, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jeff. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Gordon Mccord. I'm one of the SDSN USA co-chairs and on the faculty at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California in San Diego. I work on sustainable development issues where economics, public health, and the environment intersect, and I've been very engaged on SDSN's decarbonization work at national and local scale, on modeling sustainable land use for the United States, and on mobilizing novel data sources such as satellite remote sensing to create near real-time data streams to measure progress towards sustainable development. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker today. Dr. Marcelo Suárez-Orozco is Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts in Boston and a global leader in the areas of cultural psychology and psychological anthropology, with a focus on the study of mass migration, globalization, and education. He is the author of numerous scholarly essays, award-winning books, edited volumes, and scholarly papers in a range of disciplines and languages in international journals. Thank you for joining us, Chancellor Suárez-Orozco. We look forward to hearing from you on challenges of meeting the SDGs in the United States. I'll ask you to speak for around 10 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes for discussion. And I'll ask all the attendees to please load your questions into the Q&A. So Chancellor, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you this morning, this afternoon, this evening. And what I will do is focus my reflections on K-12 public education to pivot from unsustainable development, unsustainable consumption, unsustainable incivility, and the invasion of racialized inequality into nearly every domain of our economy and society. In these brief remarks, I will first reflect on the purposes of education, taking my lead from two pillars, SDG 4.7 and Pope Francis's radical call for a global education compact. Second, I will examine three significant challenges in education today. And finally, I hope that together in our Q&A, we can turn to what research institutions can do to achieve the transformative change we seek. I start with a case for nostalgia. Writing on the ruins of a defeated Italy at the end of World War II, Loris Malaguzzi, the father of the Reggio Emilia schools, came to see education as a project of nostalgia. A nostalgia not for the ruinous past that fascism bequeathed, but a nostalgia for the future. He wrote, quote, "We should think that we have more of a need of being nostalgic, not so much about the past, but more nostalgic about the future. The children expect us in the future where our nostalgia now sees them," end of quote. Nostalgia for the future sees the work of education as cultivating the science of healthy, flourishing, and engaged children. In the Platonic tradition, education endeavors to nurture that which is true, logic and science, that which is good, ethics and justice, that which is beautiful, aesthetics. Creating a more inclusive, humane, just, and sustainable world is education's urgent challenge. In the admirable and truly revolutionary words setting forth the agenda of SDG 4.7, we must, quote, "ensure all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyle." I continue to quote, "human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contributions to sustainable development," end of quote. In his historic address at the Apostolic Palace on February 7th, 2020, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, stated, quote, "each generation needs to consider how best to pass its knowledge and its values to the next, since it is through education that men and women attain their maximum potential and become conscious, free, and responsible. Concern for education is a concern for future generations and for the future of humanity. It is a concern profoundly rooted in hope, and it calls for generosity and courage. In order to educate, I continue to quote the Holy Father, one has to be able to combine the language of the head with the language of the heart and the language of the hands. In this way, the student can think what he or she feels and does, can feel what he or she thinks and does, and can do what he or she feels and thinks. By encouraging the training of the head, the heart, and the hands, intellectual and socio-emotional education, the transmission of individual and societal values, the virtues, and the teaching of a committed citizenship concerned with justice, and by imparting the abilities and knowledge that can prepare young people for the world of work and society, families and schools and institutions, education becomes an essential vehicle for empowering future generations, end of quote. Basic education today is a normative ideal the world over. The empirical data suggests that great progress has been made in giving boys and girls access to schooling. Prior to the pandemic, enrollment of young people in primary education was almost universal, and it is clear that the gender gaps that have been narrow. Good progress was being made. The work of educating children and youth is culturally constituted, highly varied across society, and ever evolving. Schools where seeking nomothetic approaches should reflect and reflect upon the cultural, environmental, and socioeconomic realities of the communities in which they form an essential part. The curiosity and joy of learning at a young age opens the door to the gold standard of any education system, the molding of lifelong learners who have the tools and la joie d'apprendre to continue learning long after formal schooling stops. I give you Newton's eternal words on curiosity and the joy of learning. Newton wrote, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting himself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth laid undiscovered before me, end of quote. The global COVID pandemic laid bare for the world to see the deepening inequalities in opportunities to learn that flow from race, ethnicity, immigration background, and poverty the world over. Closer to home, in the largest school districts in our country, students from the most underserved communities have become our desaparecidos. As their peers migrated to remote learning, thousands of students of color are now nowhere to be seen. COVID-19 also has foregrounded the color of poverty. Racialized inequality is education's implacable foe. In the words of the eminent Argentine cognitive neuroscientist, Sebastián Lipina, quote, different poverty indicators are associated with lower cognitive and academic performance during several stages of development. Psychological and neural evidence generated in recent decades suggests the need to review the interpretations of these associations in the sense of the deficit, and to consider the occurrence of adaptive processes instead. Concentrated poverty, deep segregation flowing from privilege, anti-Blackness, and xenophobia thwart the opportunities for eudaimonic development and wilt the flourishing of millions of children in our country and beyond. Indeed, they represent the most significant undertow for us to follow the beacon set forth by SDG 4.7. 21st century's economies and societies are predicated on increasing complexity and increasing diversity, the twin corollaries of an ever more globally interconnected, miniaturized, and fragile world. We must mind the gap between what education is and what education needs to be. Second point, on the ways each family is unhappy when it comes to education. If all families are happy the same way, as in Tolstoy's unforgettable first line in Anna Karenina, there are 3 ways at least, very important ways, in which we are unhappy qua education. First, quality education from early childhood onwards remains an elusive mirage for millions of our students. Indeed, our students continue to fall behind in international measures of mathematics literacy. In PISA 2018, for example, the US average mathematics literacy score was lower than the average of 30 education systems around the world. But we're also behind in science literacy, financial literacy, and reading literacy. The latter is essential. Literacy is foundational. Children learn to read, and thereafter, as Jean Chol, my former colleague at Harvard, once said, read to learn. Reading is epigenetic. It is a great, great achievement of the human brain. Cognitive neuroscience is beautifully mapping how it literally changes the structures of the brain. But literacies today need to go beyond the written text. As such, we need an architecture of literacies, as millions of children and youth are now full citizens of the app world and of Mundo Zoom, as they continue to delve deeper and deeper into social media and into remote teaching and learning modalities. We need a muscular research agenda on the opportunities and limitations of new technologies and the corresponding new literacies required to reach children who otherwise have little opportunities for formal learning. Structural racism and inequality in opportunities to learn is the second urgent challenge facing our schools. Our schools are more unequal and segregated, and the pandemic is dramatically intensifying pre-existing inequalities. The challenge is unfolding in the context of an extraordinary demographic transformation, as the most diverse cohort of youngsters is making its way through K-12 education system throughout our country. Schools are struggling to properly connect and educate and ease the transition and integration of large and growing numbers of immigrant and refugee youth of color. The nexus between immigration and race is intensifying. Almost a quarter of all Black students in American colleges today are immigrant origin. Over 63% of all Latinx students in our colleges and universities are immigrant origin, that is first or second generation. And some 85% of all Asian American and Pacific Islander students come from immigrant-headed households. But in the US, as well as in Europe and elsewhere, too many immigrant and refugee origin youngsters are marginalized as racially, ethnically, religiously, linguistically marked groups. The racialized disparagement of immigrant and refugee youth of color is growing, and their social belonging is being undermined as we speak. More broadly, new research suggests that the invasion of incivility, anti-Blackness, and xenophobia in schools is creating new challenges to teachers and administrators throughout the country. If we don't inoculate schools against incivility, we will forever have to protect the Congress with metal fences. The third challenge schools face today is teaching and learning an ethic of care for our ever more fragile planet. The quest for a sustainable planet and for sustainable humanity must include cradle-to-grave climate literacy for everyone, including children in K-12, college students, and grown-ups all the way to senior citizens. Students the world over are clamoring to learn science, to learn about climate change, to learn about the environment, but we're failing them. Climate change education for all, carefully conceived and well executed, has inherent value and furthermore leads to measurable desirable outcomes, including individual behavioral and attitudinal change, resulting in reductions in carbon emissions of similar magnitude to other large-scale mitigation strategies. The goal of climate literacy is to educate and empower millions of climate warriors across the world who will help solve the problems flowing from unchanged climate change and unsustainable developments. Gordon, I'm happy to say that our colleagues at UCSD, under the leadership of your colleague, Ram Ramanathan, are at the forefront of an education initiative in California, in Sweden, increasingly beyond, under the general rubric of bending the curve education project. The world is today facing multiple calamities, pandemics, environmental cataclysms, forced migrations, systemic racism, and growing inequality. As our colleague Stefania Giannini argued at that historic meeting at the Apostolic Palace, wrote, quote, "We have an education crisis that mirrors the wider global crisis, one that is social, moral, and environmental," end of quote. Tired old claims, silver bullets, and magical thinking can no longer do. Our schools must endeavor to educate the whole child for the whole world. As Senator Giannini said, quote, "Through a humanistic and holistic vision of education and development, which cannot simply be framed in terms of economic growth, learners need the knowledge and the values to live meaningful and purposeful lives in harmony with others and the planet," end of quote. Schools need to be laboratories reclaiming a shared ethical set of principles of reciprocity, solidarity, equity, inclusion, and fighting all forms of discrimination. Today, I invite you to join us in our call for a new compact for education. I conclude by echoing the words of Hillel the Elder to the effect that if not now, when? And if not us, who? Thank you.
Fantastic, Marcelo. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Very, very inspirational as always. We have 5 or 6 minutes. There's one question in the Q&A, which I'll read to you now, but also encourage others to add questions there. And then I also have a question myself. So I'll give you these two to start while other people pour other ones in. The first is from Stephen Posner. What is one key thing that you would feel every child should learn in school in order to make progress towards the SDGs?
I think the most fundamental issue is the nexus between science and the translational vehicles to disrupt and check climate change. I believe that youth from throughout the world took to the streets prior to the monster pandemic, clamoring for science, clamoring for truth and facts. We're failing them. We know how to teach science. We're not teaching science the way we should. Teaching science as a hands-on, project-based inquiry is the way to move the needle. Children, like Newton told us, are inherently curious. Today, our schools have become factories of boredom. 20, 30 years ago, we did a study asking kids throughout our country to fill in the sentence, school is. We were at UC San Diego when we did that study, Gordon. The overwhelming answer to the fill in the sentence, the school is boring. Now, cognitive neuroscience will tell you that you have to work hard to get the curiosity inherent in the unfolding, in the flourishing of the child to become bored. So I put my money in science with a purpose, translational science to fix the pathway we're currently on.
Marcelo, if I could come in just for a minute with that extraordinary observation. I looked last night out of curiosity at the PISA scores, which you mentioned, which is the US ranking quite miserably in science and math and so forth, and relating the PISA scores to performance of controlling the epidemic, controlling COVID. Turns out these strong East Asian performers like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, China, Korea, that have done such a better job of controlling the pandemic are at the top of the PISA list, and the ranking is extraordinarily strong, the correlation. Now, I don't want to oversimplify it, but a scientifically literate society probably can save itself a lot more than a scientifically poorly educated society. And I think that your point about empowerment through education and through the kind of education that speaks to realities that we're facing is extremely powerful. And I just wanted to add that little bit of evidence, direct, it's hardly definitive, but I think it is true that we are not only suffering a shortfall of knowledge and whatever that might mean for our job productivity and whatever, but also just our ability to manage in a crisis depends on our understanding and our children understanding and young people understanding what's happening. So your words are extremely on point and also very eloquent, let me add.
Thank you, Jeff. If I may, Darwin, 150 years ago, announced for the world to see the nexus between literacy, between education, and health and wellness. He wrote on the margins of what became the notebooks, a famous notation, educate the girls, multiplication sign times 2, meaning double the impact. It took your friend and former colleague, when he was heading the World Bank, our former colleague, Jeff, Larry Summers, many years later, to amplify the general nexus between literacy, education, health, and wellness. So this is a very old correlation. Darwin had the right intuition, and we're falling behind. What I see as a just tragic missed opportunity is the clamor that young people the world over have to engage in science, to engage in understanding ourselves and our environment.
I know we have to move on. I know that, but I just want to add that we had a meeting with junior high school and high school students in New Jersey and New York in an online meeting last week, where they were crying out for knowledge about climate change and what can they do and what kind of projects in their community. So it was so wonderful. These from 7th grade onward, we want to do things, help us to do things. So I think it's extremely fertile territory for that.
Jeff, as St. Thomas Aquinas said, that which is good diffuses. Even 4 years of war on science, we just come out of, it couldn't defeat this drive that children have, that Newton so beautifully articulated. Thank you so much.
We're going to work on it.
Thank you so much, Chancellor, for those great remarks. Some other people are adding questions in the Q&A in case you'd like to answer those directly, but we need to move on to the next session. Just again, thank you for such excellent thoughts to get us started.